Magamindpodcast.com.
things that I
listening to Brandon Straka's space just after he posted his video basically on Scott Presler, exposing Scott Presler. He's in a space currently.
Let's be quiet about this. I struggled with it for a really long time because I've seen the propaganda campaign that was created either by him or him and partners in his organization, or to be honest with you, I'm not 100% sure whose idea it was or who was behind it. But I can tell you that all of the reasons why people feel protective of Scott are not true. And I think it's time that we started telling the truth about what's going on, because these are not things that don't have real world consequences. This is not about any feelings I might have about him doing media or raising money or anything, although I think that there's massive implications about that too. To me, the most egregious thing about all of this is that Scott knows very well, just as I know very well as somebody who's been a very active grassroots activist out there on the ground, working with the people, doing live events, getting out there. It is very, very, very difficult to get conservatives to get involved and to take a stand and to do the work that needs to be done so that we can be successful. And when you start giving conservatives any reason to believe they don't need to get involved because everything's under control, when you start telling people, I'm flipping states, I'm going into Pennsylvania and flipping Pennsylvania, and then I'm going to go into New Jersey and I'm going to flip New Jersey and I'm going to flip Wisconsin. And there have been no results, no tangible results to back any of this up. He went into Pennsylvania when Pennsylvania was already on the brink of flipping red. He went in at the final moment. He registered a pretty small number of voters from what we can see. And then he took credit for flipping the state red and didn't even acknowledge the fact that President Trump was on the ticket is why President Trump won Pennsylvania. And don't even get me started on the fact that no one's even questioning this narrative that somehow President Trump would have lost Pennsylvania, even though he won every other swing state. He would have lost Pennsylvania if Scott Presler had not gone to Pennsylvania to register voters. But even if that was true, why did Scott have to lie about it? On the last day, and sorry, Derek, jump in here anytime, because I'm kind of just giving an opening monologue here. And then I know there are other people that want to speak on the topic as well. But I'll say this too. On the last day of voter registration in the month in 2024, which would have been October of 2024, Early Vote Action, that's Scott's organization, their Pennsylvania state leader, a guy named J.D. Longo, put out a post on behalf of Early Vote Action. And he said, I'm so proud of the Early Vote Action team. Collectively, the entire organization registered altogether 10,000 new voters in Pennsylvania. 8 days later, now remember, this is on the last day of voter registration, so it closed. 10,000 voters total for the 2024 election cycle. That's what he said. Then voter registration closed. 8 days later, Scott Presler went on Twitter and said Early Vote Action registered 50,000 voters in Pennsylvania. And he's never explained how those numbers multiplied by 5 in 8 days or provided any receipts. And most astoundingly, perhaps, no one's asked for any. For whatever reason, whatever this guy says on Twitter, people take as the gospel truth, don't ask for any evidence, don't ask for any receipts, don't ask for any proof, and they just say, thank you so much for delivering Pennsylvania for President Trump. There are people on this platform, and I'm going to keep stressing that term, this platform, because the Scott Presler Early Vote Action delusion doesn't really carry on to other platforms that much. Yes, there are some people on Facebook, Instagram, whatever, that might believe some of this stuff. But it is almost exclusively an X-platform gaslighting, brainwashing operation. There are people on this platform that think that Scott Presler registered 180,000 Amish people and drove them to the polls. There are about 90 to 92,000 Amish people in Pennsylvania total, including children. And the data now shows there was no significant change whatsoever in Amish turnout for the vote or new Amish registrations. This was entirely a lie. And his organization has raised $6.9 million based off of these lies. But again, for me, it's not even about the money. It's about the fact that we have a serious complacency problem in the conservative movement. We have a really serious apathy problem. And if you give conservatives any reason to believe that they can stay at home, they don't need to come out and work, they don't need to come out and engage with the community, they don't need to come out and vote. And that is exactly what he is doing. He has weaponized conservative apathy and told people, don't worry about it, I've got a magic wand. And I'm going to come into your state and wave my magic wand and turn it red. The problem is he has absolutely no proof or results to back up the claim that he can do that. And if he could do it, why did he lose in Wisconsin in the Supreme Court election? Why did we just lose a Senate seat in Pennsylvania that Republicans have held for 136 years? I thought he flipped the state. I thought Pennsylvania was red. That's what we were told. Where were all those 180,000 Amish people when we just lost a 136-year seat that we've held? Derek, do you want to jump in?
Sorry, I'm here. I was trying to message somebody on the back channel. Comments bashing you within minutes when the video itself is like 15 minutes long. So there's no way that any of them watched the video to have any insight as to what your claims were, but they were wanting to bash you without even hearing what you were trying to say. That was probably one of the most fascinating parts to me that I saw over the last few minutes here anyways.
Oh, for sure. But to be clear, I'm not, people, I knew that I was going to make this video for quite a while. And honestly, I've known for at least a year, maybe even years, that I was going to speak out about this. And I'll be honest, I was in a really terrible position. First of all, the first thing we needed to do was get President Trump over the finish line, get him reelected. That was the most important thing. And I sure as hell was not going to jump in and start rocking the boat and causing friction or calling things out leading up to the 2024 election. I would never do that. But then the next thing that happened is that we did get President Trump elected. And all of these people started buying into this massive propaganda campaign. And you guys, I got to tell you, it really at times has made me feel despair. Because I walked away from the Democratic Party in 2017. I walked away when people on the left became brainwashed and when leftism became a pseudo-religion, where people were just repeating things that didn't even make any sense without any evidence. People would just hear other people saying things. So they would start, oh, white people are bad. Oh, trans rights are human rights, whatever. And I'm like, do you even hear yourself? You're just repeating this because you're hearing other people repeat it. And that is exactly the same behavior I have watched since the 2024 election. I feel like I have watched conservatives go insane. Scott Presler brought 180,000 Amish people to the poll. There's not one single photograph of that. There's not one picture of a 6'7" guy with hair down to the floor transporting tens of thousands of Amish people to the polls. But people write it over and over and over again. It's literally insane. And it's time to talk about this. But after President Trump got elected, my first thought was, I don't want, if we end up in a situation where he's pardoning some people and he's not pardoning other people, and I end up in a camp of people who doesn't get pardoned, I don't want to sit around wondering what the reason why. Is it because I spoke out? Is it because I said something? But, thank God President Trump did the right thing, pardoned almost everybody on day one. And at that moment, I was like, okay, it's time for me to start speaking out about this because I've had enough. It's not just about how annoying it is and how it sucks the oxygen out of the room. This is having very real world consequences. It is going to cost us elections. It is going to cost us victories. And it is going to continue to completely demoralize the grassroots in this country. So many people in Pennsylvania worked their asses off for years to get to the point where Republicans were out registering Democrats. That did not start with Scott Presler. That was a trend that began. Phenom, I see you in here. Please feel free to jump in. I believe that was a trend that began in 2016 or 2017 and continued every single year. And then Scott came in at the last minute and said, I did it.
Well,
Phenom,
according to the data from Captain Seth Keschel, who's very well regarded in the data from multiple elections, and he's got a great Substack that goes back really far from, I think, the 2018 he has analyzed. And Pennsylvania was registering voters 21-1, Republican to Democrat. So that trend was happening. And Amish Path, honestly, was kind of the leader. They were founded by somebody within the community that did, had started doing Amish outreach, starting with the first President Trump campaign. But the reason why I'm interested in listening to this is, I'm not an influencer, I'm not a journalist, but I had my own situation with the elections when I became sick. I had to vote by mail for the first time in my whole life. And when I went back and looked at my voting record, I'm in Maricopa County, there was no record that I had voted. So I became very concerned and interested in election fraud and ballot fraud and voter fraud. So over a few years, I just decided to learn as much as I could. So I had the privilege of interviewing election analysts and investigators from all over our country. And I'm talking about all of them, the ones who have been for years, analyzing the cast vote records, using their own money to get copies of public records that cost a lot of money to do, really doing the research. We're talking about attorneys, we're talking about veterans, we're talking about people who have been in military intelligence, in the Navy, in the Marines, people who are data analysts, science. I'm sorry, I don't know I'm not a computer person, but like cybersecurity analysts, people who have worked for our own government. And time after time after time, they would submit different evidence.
Many of you out there probably become conditioned at this point to believe that Scott Presler registered tens of thousands of mules. Many of you out there probably become conditioned at this point to believe
that these people tried really hard to reach out to influencers with large platforms and did not want to talk about any of the election fraud at all. And we're often just told that, oh, well, I don't really care. So, and there's a lot of people in this audience too, and people who have data that, if you don't want to believe some of the election fraud, that's fine, but at least have the conversation, be willing to look at the data and then debunk it instead of just saying that it didn't happen or telling someone that, that you don't care. Because just registering voters isn't enough. I see some people in here who are very involved on the ground and have done really hard work for every one of you listening to help do what they can to try to stabilize and secure the elections, but they don't have a large following, right? They're not an influencer. And so sometimes, I just, you've got people up here who have larger followings that were willing to try to help these people. And I interviewed people every week to try to get the voices out, and I couldn't get anybody.
If you want, you don't have to. It's solely up to you. I know that you've had some personal experiences dealing with Scott. If you'd like to share them, you're welcome to. But let's come back. Derek, by the way, you don't raise your hand. What's going on?
No, it just makes it way easier to do that, to keep the flow of everything. I just wanted to say, and this isn't necessarily directed at anybody, but I don't see how people think that registering voters helps anything. It does not help anything at all. And in fact, if these people are not going to vote, it probably actually hurt our movement in terms of, if you've studied election integrity, of pumping up the voter rolls. I went to the DMV the other day here in West Virginia to renew my driver's license, and guess what? They ask you to register to vote. So my DMV is registering way more voters than anybody in my state, or every other state, probably the same way. I'm not gonna praise my DMV for registering voters. I don't think it really helps anything. So I just want to throw that out there. That's not directed at anybody specifically, but I've never really understood the fascination with of trying to give anybody major props for we win elections by getting registered voters to the polls, not by registering voters who never show up. So I just wanted to throw that out there. And I see some people down there. I'm going to start throwing some mics out there.
For sure. And thank you, Derek. And that's part of, certainly not the most significant piece, but definitely part of what I'm calling this mass propaganda campaign. Because I've seen Scott put out posts numerous times that literally say voter registration wins elections. How? Like, how does that make any sense whatsoever? You have no idea if this person's planning to vote or not. You don't know if the person's registering Democrat or Republican. You don't know who they support. You haven't had a conversation to try to sway hearts and minds. I mean, this is what I talk about all the time. If you want to win elections, you have to create permanent change by changing the culture, by going in and having conversations and doing the hard work of changing hearts and minds. And I want to be really clear about something too, and you're going to hear me all over the place tonight. And, just keep in mind that me speaking out about this subject is, I've got a lot of, energy in me right now, but like, you're going to hear me tonight, say things that may sound like I'm saying one thing and then the other thing. I do want to say there's value to what Scott does. Even though I'm here to call him out tonight, and even though I have a very serious problem with him, and I'll just say straight up, I think he's a compulsive liar. I mean, I really, truly think he is an absolute compulsive liar. But, if he's going to go out and stand there and register voters, great. Like, I have no problem with that. My problem is the lies and the dishonesty and the deception that has been intentionally done to manipulate people and make people believe that he's got some sort of magic formula for saving the country. And there's literally no evidence to substantiate any of the things that he has said that he has done. And if there is, show us, please. I would love. Early Vote Action raised $6.9 million in 2024. I would love to know if this organization has, if they keep records. And if they keep records, are we allowed to see them? Can we see the records of what Early Vote Action actually did? Who did you register? How many did you register? How many were Democrats?
Someone's listening to this and you've got like a sour taste in your mouth because you're kind of like, how could voter registration be bad? Please understand that I have an election integrity nonprofit. I was a political rookie in 2020. I was not active at all and got active seemingly kind of out of nowhere, but built a fairly large organization in Pennsylvania focused solely on election integrity. And I come across people all the time that don't want to be told the effort they're putting in is not fruitful. So if you spend a lot of time registering voters, please understand that I'm not, and I don't think these guys are either, saying that your work was wasted or that your effort didn't produce any fruit. But the cold hard facts of the matter are, I started taking activist training a couple of years ago to learn how to win elections as we were fighting the battle for integrity, which we don't have. There's no transparency in the reporting and the counting of the vote process, which is a huge, huge problem. But this activist training I took was from Pennsylvania Liberty Alliance and Young Americans for Liberty. And they came in, and the very first thing that the speaker said was, if people come to town to tell you that we're going to win an election by registering voters, run for your life. And I took 2 different trainings that said the same thing. And I will admit at the time I didn't quite understand what they were talking about, but you flash forward today, and like Derek was saying, in Pennsylvania specifically, when Josh Shapiro became governor, he instituted something that when you go to the DMV now and you get a state ID or a driver's license, you have to opt out if you don't want to register to vote. Our voter rolls are bloated heavily, wildly inaccurate, which our canvassing effort in 2020 proved. And anybody, quite frankly, that's run for office in Pennsylvania, that's gotten a list of registered voters in their district, whatever that is, and has knocked doors, has seen this. This is nothing new. Our voter rolls are wildly inaccurate. And so by people going to the DMV and then automatically, it's next to impossible. The verbiage is so confusing for you to even understand what you're opting in or out of. Pretty much you're automatically getting registered. The worst idea in the world, in my opinion. And again, not to put anybody down, that if you've worked hard to register voters, please hear my heart. I'm not saying that your work was fruitless and it was not worth it. It's just perhaps you weren't educated on where the real effort should have been put. And in our opinion, expert, I want to call us an expert. I hate to even say that because I'm still just a regular mom who would actually love to go back to her previous life where nobody knew who I was. But here we are. The work needs to be in restoring transparency to the counting and the reporting process, restoring local control of the voter rolls back to the counties, because the State Department can completely control that and manipulate it any which way they want. And so we got specifically concerned with Scott's big push, particularly right before the 2024 election, for voting early and voting by mail, because it's an incredibly vulnerable way to run an election. And we had worked so hard for 3.5 years to try to push our elected officials to steer clear of those things, to provide more transparency. And quite honestly, he just came in and felt like it was a nuclear bomb that was going to destroy any bit of headway that we did in fact make. And I'll add this, and you guys, I don't want to take over the space and talk. I know Pennsylvania data so well, I could talk forever.
Well, and I want to ask you about that. Sorry, I'm not meaning to cut you off, but I do want to ask you about the specific data, because we do know what actually didn't happen. So, but go ahead.
Yeah. So the numbers that we saw, we've been getting the voter rolls every week since the 2020 election. The Pennsylvania SURE system, it's called, that stands for Statewide Uniform Registry of Electors. It's just our database for how the state manages the voter rolls. It comes out weekly. It gets updated every Monday night at midnight. And so you purchase the voter rolls and you can literally track week to week what they're doing. And that's what Scott puts out on his Twitter. He'll say, just got the voter rolls and how many net gains and how many losses. But he's looking at it from a very one-dimensional aspect. It's a little bit more complicated than that. And so we were able to track the gains in Republican voter registrations year to year. Specifically, we looked at presidential election years. And between 2015 and 2016, because every year before a presidential election, you see an uptick in voter registrations, which makes sense because everyone's paying attention. It's a presidential election. But the net gains from 2015 to 2016, when compared to 2019 to 2020, are actually less. And the same thing from 2023 to 2024. It's a trend going down. And we've published all of this stuff on our website. You can go to auditthevotepa.com and check it out. But that's a little bit concerning. And to Phenom's point, Captain Seth Keschel pointed out, between 2016 and 2020, Republicans out-registered Democrats in our state 21-1, largely without Scott's help, but then also, quote unquote, lost the 2020 election. So back to Derek and Brandon's point, how is voter registration the answer if that's the case? Well, but I'll add one more thing, Brandon, then you can have it back. We do know that Scott's preferred method of registering voters is on paper. He's very known for going around to fairs and gun shows and showing how many paper registrations he does. And if you talk to folks that have worked with him, volunteered or for him, they'll tell you that's how he registers voters. Well, in 2024, we're able to track how people registered to vote, whether it was online or it was on paper. And we only have 27,000 registrations on paper, 2024. And he's claiming he registered himself 50,000 voters. So that's a little bit of a red flag that, again, we don't want to attack him. We just want to know, show us how you're keeping track of this.
Well, I'm sorry, but it's a little more than that. I want to know a little bit more than how are you keeping track of that. I want to know, where are these numbers coming from? And why are you making these assertions? This is not an accident. I'm sorry, Tony, but I don't want to sit here and give the impression that he accidentally reported the wrong numbers. That's not what happened here. Sorry.
I get it. Nope, I get it. Totally get it.
Okay. Yeah. And the other thing, Tony, is I'd like to know, is it your belief that when he was going on Twitter on a regular basis and saying, I'm in this area, we registered this number, we flipped this county, is it your belief that he was basically looking at the numbers that were coming into the government website and just taking 100% credit for everything that was coming in?
I hate to say it, Brandon, but it is my belief. It wasn't always my belief, but the more people I started talking to, here's another thing to keep in mind.
Look, wait, I'm sorry, just a second. No one should get mad at you for just saying what you believe. That's it. And you shouldn't be afraid to just say what you believe. This is just, it doesn't mean you hate him or you're out to get him. I'm just asking, is that what you believe he was doing?
I do. And the reason I believe that's what he was doing is because after interviewing countless people in counties all across the state, that's what the sentiment is. The people on the ground are working very, very hard on whatever project it is. And when it looks like there's going to be a win, Scott swoops in with his big media campaign, takes a bunch of pictures, does a video, and then takes credit. And that is kind of the consensus all across the state, sadly.
Yeah, and I want to say too, I've talked to a number of people who've worked with him, and I've talked to people who have left his organization, and I actually don't want to do this thing tonight where where we're doing hearsay because I would like if people are here who've had firsthand experiences to just tell their firsthand experiences. But this is the one thing I will say. I've talked to numerous people who have said he'll show up, he'll jump in a photo op, he'll fan out a bunch of voter registration cards, take a picture of himself and then post it out there and say, oh my God, look at what we're doing. So all these people on X are going, oh, he works so hard. Oh, he's out there all day long doing all this stuff. Talk to his volunteers. Talk to the people who work for him who say that he shows up at the last minute, jumps in a photo, fans out the voter registration cards, and then takes off. But again, hopefully there's people here who can come up and vouch for that themselves. Brian, I'm so sorry to keep you waiting. Mary Grace is up here, and I know I really want to hear from her because I think she has a personal account. And I also see Colonel Sean Smith is here, and I know he has a personal account that I'd like to hear about. Brian, if you don't mind just hanging on for a second, and then we'll come to you, I promise.
I will absolutely. Just want to plug, everyone, please do retweet this space. And also some of the data that's being discussed is on realscottpresler.com. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. Mary Grace, go ahead.
Hey, Brandon. Thank you for holding the space. I listened to your video, and I waited through the whole video before thinking about commenting. So, but a couple of issues that I wanted to touch on. Just running the numbers. If in fact Scott registered 50,000 people in the last year leading up to the election, that would be the math doesn't math very well, because that would be about, well, it's not 12 months because, they had to all be registered before the beginning of November. So it was more like 10 months plus. So that's over 1,000 people a week that have to be registered. So it's coming out at about 150 people a day. I just don't see that adding up, especially if he's taking credit for doing that himself. I was just running the numbers while we were talking. If he is a phenom, then maybe he did, but I just don't see that happening. And then to speak to your point about, him showing up, bringing the voter registrations, registering people. I was at an event in Erie, Pennsylvania, speaking, and the Patriot group up there is amazing. I've been in touch with several groups through my friend Sam Faddis, who is headed up the Pennsylvania Patriot Coalition. Amazing people, and the grassroots people that I've met have been incredible. And so really I want to give them a lot of credit because I know that they have been working very hard at coming together and holding grassroots events and doing boots on the ground work that is so essential in any state. And I think that all of those different Patriot groups should get way more credit than they're getting. But at this particular event that I was at, it was very much like what Tony, is it Tony from Audit the Vote? I think we may have met. If it was Tony, if I got your name wrong, I apologize. So if what I saw was, this was a pretty small event, and when I was speaking, and when I say small, it was maybe 200 at the most people there, not a huge crowd, but Scott did come, and he was in the back of the room, and had the voter registration table set up. And I had met Scott at many occasions. Some of the walkaway events that I was at with you, Brandon, the very first walkaway march. So Scott knew who I was, and I was actually shocked when I went up to say hello to him and gave him a hug, and there was just no response. It was like he had never seen me before, and that was. I'm trying not to read too much into it, but it was hard not to because of what I had been watching over the previous a couple of years. And it wasn't anything that I could put my finger on, but it was a sort of self-promotion that I had been noticing with Scott. And I was one of his earliest supporters. I mean, back when he was like little Scott Presler coming out, with his gaze for Trump, reveal. I was one of the very first people to follow him and to support him and to promote him. And so I just found the transformation to be somewhat odd, because I felt like, when you, like Brandon had said in the video, when somebody is actively promoting you and giving you a platform. I mean, I've never had a huge platform on Twitter or X, but at least, I've been, I think, pretty good about putting people out there and acknowledging them and giving them shout outs and things like that. So that was my experience. Now, one thing that I want to touch on here is something that I saw in the comments, because I've seen this reaction over and over throughout the years, and it's something that I see a lot with within MAGA, and that is, there is a massive resistance to anything that looks like fighting. And I see people commenting repeatedly and saying, just stop this infighting, stop the infighting. And I want to comment on that because I've seen it so many times. Guys, we can't always agree on everything. And when somebody calls out another person and asks them to give receipts or to tell the truth about something, that is not infighting. And if you're afraid to confront anomalies or inconsistencies or things that look like outright lying, then you become an enabler. And that is exactly what we saw from the Democrat Party. And that is why so many people have left the Democrat Party, because they realize that they are participating in a codependent relationship that is extremely unhealthy. And one of the things that Brandon articulates so well is that we cannot become that in the America First MAGA movement, whatever you want to call it. We have to be willing to call out inconsistencies, lies, deception, propaganda. If we don't do that, if we put our heads in the sand and put our hands over our ears and say, la, 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 nobody fight, nobody argue, nobody disagree with anybody, nobody call somebody out for what appears to be lying, then we are headed for a very, very bad road. And the reason that I know that is because, I'm 60 years old, and I have seen the results and I've seen the consequences of people refusing to look at the truth for what it is. And that's why we're here. When President Trump first came on the scene, people constantly criticized him for not being what I would call holy enough, that he was unconventional, that he wasn't presidential enough, and they still do that. People still to this day will say, well, I don't know if he's a real Christian. And, it really upsets me. And I've defended him, and I've defended people who aren't conventional, who say things in ways that we don't necessarily want to hear. Because, when you're sick and when there's a massive tumor on the side of your face, you don't want somebody sugarcoating what they're trying to tell you. You actually need them to get a scalpel and cut it off. And so when you have truth tellers in our movement who are willing to say the hard things, you can't then expect them to withhold the truth because it doesn't feel good to your ears. But I mean, we see that even in the Bible. People want their ears tickled, and they don't want to hear the truth. They want milk, not meat. And we've got to eat meat, guys, and we've got to hear hard things. We have to hear that somebody that people are worshiping may not actually be telling you the truth.
Mayor Grace, can I also just say
Please,
quick?
Yeah.
May I say too? I would expect the same in return. My God, first of all, you guys, there is no claim I have ever made about Walkaway. There is nothing I've ever said about my work that I wouldn't be willing to face scrutiny about. If you guys ever want to sit me down in a chair, shine a bright light in my face, and ask me about anything I've ever said, I am always happy to bring any receipts that I can bring, substantiate anything I've ever said. And if you feel at any point like I'm going off the deep end, I mean, how easy would it be for me to go to New Jersey or Virginia and say, oh, I just did this event today. I got 2,000 people to walk away today. And yesterday I got 1,500 people to, like, somebody at some point should be like, really, dude? Like that seems like a lot. Like, is that really happening? And I would expect that I should be asked to substantiate what I'm claiming. But I want to go to Colonel Sean Smith because I know.
Thank you, Brandon.
Yeah, thank you, Mary Grace, and please feel free to jump in, anytime you want.
Okay.
Colonel Smith.
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Thanks. Everything I just heard, I agree with. I don't know who Mary Grace is, but it makes me want to listen more.
Colonel Smith, real quick, just for people who don't know you, because my audience, I've interviewed you many times, but my audience is much smaller than Brandon's. And could you just share like your vast experience as a veteran, your role in like cyber world, and your role as president of Cause of America?
Sure. I usually want to introduce myself as some guy in Colorado, which I actually am. So I spent a little over 25 years on active duty, did space and missile operations, a lot of special technical operations and operational testing. Special technical operations is dealing with like compartmented and sensitive capabilities, the super secret squirrel stuff. And then I wrapped up my active duty time. During that time, I did everything from commanding ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, nukes, to doing operational testing of weapon systems, to operating space surveillance systems and weapon systems. And then I was a commander at a missile warning site in Cape Cod, so I got to do the installation and the unit commander of this fantastic team. And then I wrapped up after doing a tour doing research with RAND Corporation. I did tour my last active duty assignment with Directorate of Operational Test and Evaluation under the Office of Secretary of Defense, where I was the senior military evaluator for space and intelligence surveillance and reconnaissance systems. So I was responsible for the oversight of operational testing for all space systems in the Department of Defense except for satellite communications. So global positioning systems, space-based infrared, space fence, those kind of things, weather satellite follow-on, command and control systems, and then a lot of compartmented weapon systems. And after active duty, I stayed for about a year. My boss had asked me to stay and help him with some things. And so I did something for about a year called adversarial assessment with this team. And what we did was look at the national security data that had been compromised and exfiltrated by some specific foreign adversaries over about a 5-year period, how they did it, what they had gotten to, how it changed their research. So we were assessing what they knew, the impacts on our weapon systems. And we wrote a couple of reports out of that. And then the last report, the new director in the office did not want to sign out because what we were telling them was too embarrassing to the military services. A previous report had gone up to the president and to the Secretary of Defense and that kind of thing. And so I said that, that's it. I'm out of here. And so I literally just walked out of the contractor job. I took my tiny house and moved to Colorado. So I didn't intend to ever do anything with government or anything like that again. But on election day in 2020, I was reading an article about turnout here in Colorado, and it piqued my interest. Something was wrong about the data they were citing. And so I just started going to do research. I looked at all the Secretary of State's data and downloaded other data, did some regression analysis against population changes, and then started reading voting system manuals and voting system test plans and reports. And whereas I know a lot about cyber, especially cyber threat, not compared to people like Jeff O'Donnell or Dr. Doherty or Clay Parikh or those kind of people, but I know a lot about the threat. And but I really am an expert in testing. And so when I read the testing procedures for our voting systems and then the plans and reports, I thought this can't be right. But the more I read, the more alarmed I was. And that's how I ended up in election integrity. I didn't have any intention of doing it. I didn't literally before the 3rd of November, I didn't know anything about voting systems. So long story short, I got involved in a Colorado volunteer group, and then that led to going to the Symposium South Dakota, where I met a lot of the patriots, grassroots from around the country, but also, I had worked a little bit there with Mike Lindell, and he asked us later in the year to stand up Cause of America, which is a nonpartisan nonprofit focused on helping groups like Audit the Vote PA as much as we can, although they're pretty far along. It's, we basically wanted to take the lessons we had learned and try to help other people shortcut so that they didn't have to go through the same process. That's the short version. So I'm one of the officers with Cause of America, and that's what we do full time. So my experience, because of that, since I've been doing election integrity pretty much full time since about February or March of 2021, I had retired, and my plan was
many of you out there probably
not work, but you can't look away when you see something like this. So anyway, because of that, I was pretty aware of, increasingly aware of what works and what doesn't work, and what makes sense, what doesn't. We do a lot of data analysis. I'm not one of the data guys. We have an excellent data analytics lead. We had an excellent one before him, and this is Vic Bertoli as our analytics lead, and he's run hundreds and hundreds of millions of voter roll data records through both NCOA and then other analyses, and written recommendations for the new administration for Congress about how they tackle some of the issues. So we have close relationships with a lot of other election integrity groups like Voter GA, True the Vote, etc. So my experience with Scott, like a lot of people, I first became aware of him when he was picking up trash in Baltimore, and I thought, oh, that's great. First of all, do something. Second, be positive, enthusiastic. That's awesome. I was a big supporter. And then he started talking about registering voters, and I thought, well, that's great too. Let's register more voters. But he's got this, from a distance, I didn't know him. From a distance, he has this very sort of positive, enthusiastic personality, and I think that's really great. I would say I would have classified myself as a supporter of him without having met him. But then when he started getting into promoting early voting and ballot harvesting, that kind of thing, well, then it's like that. You could hear the brake sound. It came, my support came to a screeching halt. Not that I wanted him to not register voters, but early voting, if you're not familiar with Jeff O'Donnell's work or Draza Smith's work or Doc Doherty's work, you can go look at Jeff O'Donnell's site, Fingerprints of Fraud, and you can see his reports and his video that he has done. We didn't talk about, but Jeff O'Donnell was one of the forensic examiners for the Mesa County, Colorado forensic reports on the images that Tina Peters had taken. And so it was Doug Gould for the first 2 reports, and then Jeff O'Donnell and Doc Doherty for the 3rd, and Mark Cook was also involved in that. And I was essentially like the technical editor for all 3 of those reports. And so if you look at Jeff O'Donnell's report or watch his video, which I think is a very, easy to understand summary, it's not hard to understand. And this is the same pattern that Doc Doherty and Draza Smith identified. There are what are called PID controllers at work, a proportional integrative derivative. When you see ratios of votes in cast vote records, that over time, instead of approaching kind of a mean between the variation, instead they have a progression that is a slope towards a set point. There's no way to do that naturally with voters submitting their votes. It's impossible to do. It's impossible. If you had 100 people in a room, you would have a difficult time. And I've coordinated large groups of people, in the military, commanded formations, etc. It's not easy. You cannot get 10,000 people to do that kind of thing. And it's a very clear evidence of a synthetic process at work. And that process doesn't work very well unless you have intelligence or information coming from information about votes being submitted. So this is where early voting actually enables rigging of votes. When you early vote, you're not just submitting that ballot and losing chain of custody of it. oftentimes through a Dropbox or through the mail, you're also providing information to people who are running large-scale data analytics and models to determine how many ballots they need to inject to achieve a particular ratio and a particular outcome in the election. And we tried to explain that. So I don't want to say stalk, that's the wrong word, but whenever I had a chance to be on X or Twitter and then X, and Scott was on there, I would try to catch him in a room so that we could talk about this issue, because I didn't know him personally. And he always seemed to dodge it. He would either be silent or he would leave the room when I joined it. There was one space that was hosted apparently by a friend or ally or something of his. And when I joined and they let me come up to ask him questions, they then let him answer. And it was sort of a kind of a retort more than an answer. I was asking him about, early voting, and he said something to the effect of like 2 words, Governor Youngkin or something like that. And I tried to respond and they muted me. So the people in that space couldn't, didn't get the benefit of like a discussion. So anyway, make a long story, I don't think it's possible to make it short, but a little bit shorter. Finally, when TPUSA had invited Mike Lindell and some of the kind of Lindell team, as we informally referred to ourselves, to go to Las Vegas to that event, I think that was in, February of 24 maybe. We got invited to go there, and Scott was also speaking. And so even though we were backstage, it was, that wasn't appropriate to approach him there. But when he was out sort of in the foyer area, out in front of the venue, I did approach him and say, hey, look, I've been trying to talk to you for like 6 months. Can we talk about this early voting thing? And he immediately launched into this sort of diatribe about people talking about his sexuality and this incident in Virginia, whatever, with the video. And I said, hey, that's not me. I just want to talk about election. And then he said, well, you have to disavow, people on your team. And like, nobody on my team. And then he pointed at a couple of people like David Clements, and he pointed at Dr. Frank, Douglas Frank, who was right next to me. And I said, well, they're not cause of America either. I'm cause of America. Can we, stay on target here? And then I said, early voting enables election rigging, and I can explain to you why. And as I was saying that, I can explain to you why. He cut me off, and this is what I've said before. It's like a mask dropped, and he snarled, "I don't care." And then he kind of leaned forward, like sort of like tried to lean over me, which I thought was funny. If you knew anything about my background, you'd understand why anybody trying to do something intimidating is hilarious to me. And he is taller than me, but there are sayings about people being big. But anyway, so that was my experience with Scott, and that was a point where that mask dropped, and he told me he didn't care. And I already knew that he had gotten a lot of funding through TPUSA. What we had heard was $5 million to push early voting. So I was, I guess I was disappointed about that. And then, I've seen a lot of his claims, and I try to answer where I see he's blocked me now, which makes it more difficult. But I've seen a lot of his claims about like Pennsylvania and Virginia. The people who had the greatest effect in Virginia were the Virginia Project, and what they did with Dropbox watching, what they did with poll watchers, and what they did with chasing, just like Audit the Vote PA has done, just like New York Citizens Audit, and now Project Civic could do.
Hey, Sean.
Citizens. Yeah.
Sean, can I stop you for a second?
Sure.
Why did he block you?
Well, it's not clear. I mean, I've probably given him lots of reasons. I mean,
okay, so there wasn't like a really specific post or a specific moment. Okay.
No. And I don't, I don't like go after him personally. I care about the things he says and the ideas that he promotes.
Well, yeah,
that's what I care about.
Yeah, and that's the thing, because, and I'm going to go to Brian next because he's been really patient. But there's, maybe I'll actually create a thread and just ask if anybody has been blocked by Scott Presler for asking them. Well, no, I'm not even being funny.
Yeah.
I'm asking you about this on purpose because there are literally hundreds of people who have reported that he blocks them if he asks them. Not people being nasty, not attacking, but literally just asking him, can you verify the things you're saying, or how do you explain this? And they get blocked. And I just think that's really interesting. I mean, why can't you answer questions about the things that you're claiming? I find that really alarming. But I want to go to Brian because he's been very patient. Hey, Brian.
Hey, thank you. And let me know if you get any kind of echo or you can't hear me properly. First of all, Brandon, thank you so much for daring to speak the truth. And I know you're going to come under a lot of personal attack for this, so thank you in advance for doing that. And to everyone who's listening, I'm talking to you. If you have not shared this space, please like, share, retweet it. You need to share it. This is a message that needs to come out, as well as Brandon's video. So please do that right now. Also, in the comments, if you want to look at some of this data and evidence that disproves concretely many of Scott's claims, please visit a website, realscottpresler.com, realscottpresler.com, realscottpresler.com. And, Brandon, you were talking about an interesting thing about, Mr. Presler blocking people. And we did a space. It was about three hours long. It was, I don't know, maybe a month ago. And we talked about a lot of the data that was on the website. But there was a very interesting thing that happened. Many people that were a member of that space reported that all of a sudden they were blocked by Scott Presler, whether they followed him or not, whether they had any relationship, ever commented with him, and they were just blocked. And what we began to look at that a little bit, and it looks like they ran a very aggressive blocking script that anyone who was on the space or anyone who reposted or liked anything related to questioning Scott Presler was blocked by him. And also, if you just happen to follow someone who did, there's people that said, I didn't attend the space, I didn't watch the video, I've never been to his profile, I don't follow him. I'm blocked by him for some reason. I must be that I followed some people that, that liked or retweeted it. So many people don't realize that Scott Presler's father, Robert Presler, is a director of information in the Pentagon, or he was. You can look on his LinkedIn profile. He did an interview with Sebastian Gorka talking about Scott Presler in his previous role. But there's some very interesting things, and there's a paper that Scott Presler's father, Robert Presler, sponsored when he was in the Pentagon. It's called Improving C2 and Situational Awareness for Operations in and Through the Information Environment. But what the important is what that paper discusses, and it discusses influencing political outcomes through social media and essentially automation, so bots or AI. And it talks about how that's done, and it'd be very, very easy to see that applied to something like reputation management. And there's a lot of evidence, again, on realscottpresler.com, and it appears, given the evidence, there's 9 pages of screenshot, for example, reposting the same phrase over and over, Scott Presler is a national treasure. It appears that these are tactics to manage Mr. Presler's reputation and also artificially boost his popularity, his narrative. And I'm sure Brandon will experience it. His posts are going to be, there's a technique in the paper called flaming. And basically what it means is he will be inundated with negative gaslighting comments on his post. And they're designed to, discourage people from posting anything like that ever again, and to control the narrative. If you're on social media and you see a video and then there's 100 comments under it saying, oh, this is garbage, Scott Presler's a national treasure, most people would react and say, okay, well, this must not be true. But the reality and the evidence seems to indicate that these are techniques that are being used, again, to influence a person's reputation, to influence political outcomes. And why would Scott Presler do that? It was mentioned, that Charlie Kirk posted and Turning Point committed to $5 million. That was before his PAC, Early Vote Action, was formed. And Brandon mentioned it. His PAC has received about $7 million. There was an article estimating Mr. Presler's net worth at $4 million. He currently owns about 3 properties, including a $550,000 house that he inherited. Also, he recently purchased another home, which he posted on his own profile in Pennsylvania, and then he owns a apartment in downtown Pittsburgh, $320,000. So this article by Kartik Pratap estimates Mr. Presler's annual income is 700,000, net worth of $4 million. And don't forget that Mr. Presler received a free $100,000 diesel Suburban in 2024 as part of a crowdfunding campaign. So what we see,
Brian,
yeah, go ahead.
Brian, can I ask you though, because I wasn't even going to bring up money or anything like that, because to me it doesn't really matter. I don't. To me, the issue is not what he's being paid, or if people want to buy him a car or buy him a house. I think that, like, who cares? What is the relevance of bringing that up? I guess I'm asking.
No, that's a good point. And what I'm saying is, the problem is Mr. Presler has made a lot of claims that have been disproven. He's been thrust into prominence. I get what you're saying, but when you're being dishonest and using tactics that are clearly against X's terms of service, clearly misleading the public, and then you have a financial interest coupled on top of that, that becomes extremely problematic. And so it's those three things really together that I suppose is the relevance. And
So you kind of feel like there's a game being played, and if not for that game, people wouldn't be buying into this narrative and then feel compelled to buy him a house or a car or whatever.
Yes.
Which again, I want to maintain. Yeah, you can, but 1 second. I just want to go on record again as saying I have literally zero problem with that. None of the complaints that I have about any of this are about how people are financially supporting him or anything. I'm a red-blooded capitalist, and I believe that people are allowed to do anything that they want with their money. And if they want to, buy Scott clothes, a car, a house, I do not care. I only care about what is true and what's not true, and the incredibly damaging impact that I think this is having on the grassroots and is ultimately going to have on our elections. But Tony, was that you?
That was me. I just wanted to point out, I'm looking at the comments, and a lot of people are saying, where is Scott? You should give him a chance to defend himself. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Brandon, he's been invited and he's not here. So no one's keeping him out. He's choosing not to be.
He was invited. He was tagged. I retweeted the invite. I would love it if he would come. And if he did come, I would be nothing but civil and courteous and respectful, and just ask him questions and allow him the opportunity to answer. I mean, that's all I'd like to do. But Brian, to your point, I'm actually kind of laughing at some of these comments that I'm getting. One person here wrote, "What has Brandon Straka ever done?" Yeah. But there was a really funny one. I read this a second ago, which I can't find. But anyway, yeah. I mean, I know what I was going to say. A lot of these people that are defending him, it's really disturbing to me, because it's like social justice warrior behavior that I saw on the left. One woman actually wrote, and I'm not kidding, she was like, who cares if there are so many people lying and cheating? Why are you going after him? And so I wrote her back and I said, so if he is lying and cheating, you're okay with that? And I don't understand. I mean, it's become like a pseudo religion for people buying into whatever it is that they feel about this narrative that he saved Pennsylvania. And it's weird. And I mean, truly, it is almost exactly like when I'm dealing with people on the left and like getting them to see that they've been lied to and deceived, but they want to just keep pledging this allegiance to these ridiculous narratives about like trans people or racial issues or something. It's like we literally have data that's showing us that he did not do the things that you believe that he did. That's making you feel defensive of him. But you're like, no, don't tell me the data. Don't tell me the facts. I don't want to know. He saved Pennsylvania. Like, it's
Brandon,
come on.
I need you to come in here, Rachel. I'm live streaming. I can't answer you.
I agree with you that people can spend the money the way they want, but I think that the reason it is an issue here is because I, for one, have believed for a long time that Scott was sort of like a penniless college student who was driving around in his old Peter car, that that he was much more needy than he actually turns out to be. And when you're talking about an influence operation, and somebody is wanted with a certain persona, that's part of the operation. And, if it is being used to deceive and therefore divide, because obviously now we're seeing a division. And, the truth does divide. It divides the truth from lies. And you're seeing people who are acting like social justice warriors who are defending him no matter what. And they're telling you, stop picking on him, leave him alone. He's the good guy here, et cetera, because the money that has gone into manipulating algorithms, manipulating chat, that very much comes into play if someone is behind an influence operation, whether it's simply to bolster his reputation or to create a divide in the movement. Which, I mean, I've seen this happen quite a bit, and I think there are people in this chat who are listening. I know of at least one who's listening right now who has been through this, who has seen this type of thing happen repeatedly within the MAGA movement. And so I'm not so quick to discount the money part of it.
No, I think that's a solid point, actually.
Okay.
I think, I guess my whole thing is I don't want to sit around talking about money from the perspective of people feeling envious about somebody getting rewarded or getting possessions, because it's not anybody's business. Like, and
and I don't like whenever you ask like socialist and says, "Oh, you can't make money if you do, you're a grifter." I understand that. I mean, it ticks me off. I'm like, okay, fine. If you want to be poor and you want to, act and think like a socialist, that's on you. But when did I don't? I mean, our president certainly doesn't think that way. I mean, he's got like gold toilets. So let's take his example and pursue wealth. However, if the money is used as part of an operation to influence, which clearly it has, because the perception, even that tag of Scott Presler is a national treasure. We've seen so many coordinated campaigns like this from the left, and I mean, you can go through Twitter archives and see phraseology. I mean, we know even with the fake news that they have talking points, the 3 a.m. talking points that are put out across the media on a daily basis. We saw it during COVID. We're in this together, et cetera, et cetera. Do it for others. All of those things. Those are the types of things that are used to sway entire groups of a population, which we are now living through the aftermath of that. And okay, a perfect example right now in real time is the number of boomers that are the pre I guess we would call them like the bra burning feminist boomers that are now in their 70s. They're now standing out there promoting the burning and bombing of Tesla dealerships and holding signs that say hands off my whatever. That's all. I mean, they've just been manipulated into saying and thinking those things. Well, it's happened so many times on the right as well. Scott Presler is a national treasure. Somebody paid to get that messaging out into the airwaves trending. And so in that respect, the money does make a difference. That's my point. And
sorry, for sure. Derek, are you still with us?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I also, Shell offered to come up and help co-host and direct traffic. I see there's so many people requesting to speak. I honestly don't even know where to start. So I'll kind of let you
I wasn't for sure, like, you know what I mean? I was trying to let you navigate some of that because I wasn't for sure.
Yeah.
To know or whatever and wanted to bring it up, but I didn't know.
But I do think there's an opportunity here to kind of set a few ground rules for the space, which we haven't done yet. And we haven't needed to, thankfully, because it's gone pretty well so far. Number one, if you're coming up to speak, you're allowed to say anything you want, ask anything you want, like, great. But one, we're not going to do any personal attacks about his sexual orientation or about whatever, his appearance or anything like that. I want to talk about the claims in Pennsylvania. I want to talk about what I consider to be serious problems about what he's purporting to have done, or any personal experiences that you might have that seem contradictory from his public persona to the actual experience that you've had with him in real life. Number two, I don't want to get involved in conspiracy theories. I don't want people coming up here saying, well, there's this thing. What does that mean? And he's adjacent to this. What is that? Like, if you can't draw a direct line between A and B and the point you're trying to make, I'm really not interested. I just want to talk about facts, numbers, data, and personal experiences. And then the last thing I want to say too is I can totally understand and appreciate that he and I have a lot of mutual followers and a lot of overlap. And I also understand this is probably coming very out of left field for a lot of my followers and my fan base. And I'm sure a lot of people are just like, what the hell is going on, and feeling really uneasy about this. And I can understand and I appreciate it. And I care deeply about that too, by the way, because I care very, very much about my own followers. But if you are a follower of mine, or if you're a fan of mine and you're in the comments right now saying that, you know, you're either going to unfollow me for talking about this, or you're, you know, strongly disapprove, you guys, my allegiance first and foremost is to the truth. And that is why I walked away from the Democratic Party. And part of the reason I walked away from the Democratic Party is because the people around me started telling me I wasn't allowed to ask questions. I wasn't allowed to talk about this or that they would punish me or disconnect from me, or, you know, that I would face consequences for not going with the public narrative and the vibe and what was being said. I'm not doing it, you guys. And I want you to know, I'm not saying that I don't care. I do. If you unfollow me, or if you're going to turn on me, I do care about it, but I care about the truth more. And I'm always going to fight for the pursuit of truth. And I believe that we are all being lied to and propagandized to, and we have a lot of data to back that up. And again, Scott Presler, you are welcome to come in this space. I would love for you to come in here and just answer a few questions. Why did the Pennsylvania director of your organization post that organization-wide you guys registered 10,000 voters, and 8 days later you inflated that number by 500% and told the public that you registered 50,000 voters and that you delivered the presidential win for President Trump? I would like to know, do you have records at your organization to substantiate the numbers that you're claiming that you registered? And what is the true and accurate number of Amish people that you registered and delivered to the polls? I just want to know the answers to these questions. Why do people believe it's anywhere from 80,000 to 180,000 Amish people that you registered and took to the polls? Do you have any evidence to back that up? I just want to know. And I think that we should be allowed to ask these questions, because these narratives lingering and persisting are contributing to conservative apathy and complacency, and people feeling like they don't need to get involved and do anything because states are being flipped and he's coming in and waving a wand and flipping states. People are not showing up to vote. They're not showing up to volunteer. They're not getting involved. They think everything's under control, and it is not under control, which is why we just lost a Senate seat in Pennsylvania, a state that was supposedly flipped just months ago. We lost a seat that we've held for 136 years. And the Wisconsin Supreme Court, which he blamed everybody else for, it was because of him that Trump won, but he blamed everyone else when we lost in Wisconsin Supreme Court. I don't understand. Did you flip Wisconsin or not? I would just like some answers to these questions. Leah, what's up?
Well, Brandon, thank you for having the courage to step up and tell the truth. I know none of this is easy. When I first started calling out, starting in 2022, and for those that don't know my background, I am a witness to election fraud. I have uncovered. I am an expert in the elections, and I'm a hardcore grassroots activist in Pennsylvania that gets suppressed just like every other grassroots effort. And many of them are sitting in this space, like Mark Cook. A lot of people I know in here, and I just want to say thank you all for the hard work that you do, and don't get credit for. So my direct experience actually with Scott was I had planned for Scott to come into Delaware County in 2020, and that's when he was just talking about doing voter registration, and he was very small potatoes, and didn't speak the way that he does now. And I, despite setting up that entire, seminar, I did not, he didn't give me any credit for it. He ended up giving credit to a woman by the name of Valerie Biancanello, who's a now in my county. So that was my very first experience with Scott. And then later on, of course, I had watched over a period of time when he started in Stop the Steal. And then I noticed that his platform was getting bigger and bigger. At least it seemed that way. And then fast forward when really this whole early vote nonsense and ballot harvesting came from the RNC. And it came and when I started speaking out about, obviously for the past 5 years,